Dune Spice Wars is an interesting phenomenon. A small indie early access game taking the world by storm. With 1,500 players online right now on Steam, 79% upvoted by users, and accompanied by a fanfare of "Support indie developers." Well, I like this game, I will say that right now. I like it, I enjoyed playing it. I think £25 is a bit steep, and it's not without its issues. But the entire narrative surrounding Dune Spice Wars is, how can I put this, a bit off. I have to stipulate that there is a fine line between hidden mechanics and me not knowing what's going on. In fact, it's a big fat line, and probably fairly tightly encircling me. I don't understand much of what's going on when I play video games. It took me about a week to work out how to brush my horse in Red Dead Redemption 2, so don't even get me started about strategy games. So you will see horrifying mistakes, terrible decisions in the political voting, and I may well gripe about shit just because I don't understand it, but I am nevertheless going to call it how I see it whilst I'm reviewing this game. I will try my best not to trample all over the lore of Dune, because I've been warned that doing this will make grown men cry. The lore of this story covers 6 books and 2 movies. I wish. It covers 6 original books by Frank Herbert, 21 subsequent books co-authored by Brian Herbert, his son, and Kevin J. Anderson, 11 books of short stories. There are 9 books about all of these books, 20 comics and graphic novels, 2 movies, 2 TV series, 6 video games, and probably a whole lot of other stuff that I forgot to copy and paste from Wikipedia. So who am I kidding? I will obviously trample all over the Dune lore. So sadly, today some people are just going to have to use that box of Kleenex on their desks for the purposes for which it was originally invented. I have read a couple of books a long time ago when I was on holiday, and on holiday I am constantly drunk. And I've watched both the incredibly awesome David Lynch movie and the recent overrated one, so I'm not entirely ignorant. Anyone crying yet? I hope so. It also naturally follows that there will be spoilers. I can't discuss the game without discussing Dune, so dear Lord, stop watching if you don't want spoilers. And I'm literally being 100% serious about this. If you have not had your Dune cherry popped, this video will be a rough ride for you. I would note that I have not mastered this game, but I have beaten it on 2 different factions on the default difficulty, medium. I would also note that I'm not 100% certain that I will end up completing my playthrough on the remaining 2 factions, and that's a clue right there. And this is a very important caveat. I will be reporting on this game as experienced over the first 50 plus hours. What I mean by this is that I will be reporting on this game as experienced to the best of my knowledge of what is going on, and I will no doubt complain about certain things that have happened that may well be hidden systems, hidden mechanics, enemy espionage attacks, or stuff I just don't understand. Because this game does a shit job of pulling things on you about which you have no way to understand until you've played through as all the factions. I will no doubt say something is shit, broken or unbalanced, only to have some Dune Spice Wars Nazi explain in great detail in the comment section how said balkness was actually the enemy AI doing X, Y or Z, and that I don't realise what's going on behind the scenes. That's if I'm lucky. They will most likely spew a torrent of rage at me for defaming their favourite game. So yeah, I get it, duly noted. But if something fucks up my playthrough and I have no way to understand this at the time and need to play 200 more hours to get it, well frankly my dear, I think that's a problem too. Games need to explain things or let you learn them in a consistent manner. If I say something is dumb because I am dumb, fine, I will own that. but if hidden mechanics fuck my playthrough, it begs the question, what function does that serve? A brief history of the Dune story and legacy is required so that the game makes sense in context. I will be as quick as I can and do my absolute utmost to avoid as many spoilers as possible. He dies, and he dies too. He comes back to life. He's the traitor. He's also a shit dentist. She survives, which is nice because I fancy her. Posh boy takes over the Fremen. That's his missus. I fancy her too. The nice people get sent to Arrakis, and the good guys win. Everyone gets chased by penis worms. Baby penis worms shit out spice. Spice is space drugs that lets people make hyperspace jumps with their noggins. Fat creeper dies. Shame really, I like Tim. Everyone lives happily ever after. But it rains, so everyone's fucked. So no more hyperspace. The end. There you go. I'm pretty sure that ruined it for everyone. I may have missed out several thousand years of story history that happened before and after this, and stuff that happened during it. But if you forget everything else, remember this. Penis worms bad. Spice good. Spice is on Arrakis. She's super hot. Basically, the Dune legacy is a science fiction tale set roughly 20,000 years into the future. Any alien appearance of any races in the Dune saga is purely the result of divergent evolution, as humanity never ended up finding aliens. Only possible clues to their existence. So however alien some of these freaks look, it's basically humans that have evolved to look strange. AI is banned because of a huge war between the humans and AI that nearly wiped us out. Space travel is basically done by these super evolved, highly intelligent pilots of the Spacing Guild that use the spice to fold space, thus allowing intergalactic hyperspace travel. You see, the spice melange basically extends life, expands consciousness and allows people to become prescient. It allows them to perceive time out of order. Have you ever seen someone take acid and start talking about altered states of awareness, understanding the world differently and being able to perceive the world freed from the shackles of human consciousness? Well, spice does all of that, only unlike taking acid, the person is not just gibbering a load of shit. Spice actually does all that stuff that stoners talk about. It's basically the universe's best smart drug and a hyperspace travel enabler, so obviously it's the most valuable commodity in existence. So yes, he who controls the spice controls the universe. A phrase that is conspicuously missing from the new movie because pronouns. Although apparently it wasn't in the original books either. So there is that. Apparently this spice melange is only found on one planet, Arrakis. Arrakis is a beautiful, serene desert shithole. No, really, it's a shithole. There is barely any water. Giant penis worms with teeth that respond to rhythmic sounds by coming out of the ground and trying to eat you, and the only people who can survive there naturally are the Fremen, a race of people that survive in the deep desert by wearing these rubber suits that trap all of their sweat, urine and bum traffic, and utilises the movement of the body's muscles to mechanically pump the excretions through the suit's recycling system, returning the fluid to a drinking tube for the user. So yes, Fremen probably smell fucking terrible. Personally, I thought Chani was rather sexy in her rubber Fremen suit, until I thought too much about the biomechanical processes and the physics of her stillsuit. Just think about it. The idea of putting your hand on her thigh is quite appealing until you realise that you would probably end up massaging her poop through the recycling unit around her leg. That certainly took the edge off for me. There is nothing about toilet business that I find remotely sexual. Toilet stuff is toilet stuff. Sex stuff is sex stuff. Call me old fashioned, but where I was brought up, the bedroom is for sex stuff and the toilet is for taking drugs.
What were you guys doing in there?
I was sucking his cock.
Although the bins behind the chip shop were good for either. Or both. Sometimes simultaneously. Anyway, Charney's excremental thigh pouches aside, humanity is pretty much run by the Landsraad, which is like a corrupt space parliament, with different large houses being ruled over and voting on stuff. There is lots of politics, backstabbing, and like any modern political system of governance, everyone hates each other's fucking guts. The House Atreides are actually a nice bunch, popular and trustworthy, so naturally the Emperor sees them as an existential threat. So he tricks them into moving to Arrakis to be in charge of spice production. Obviously it's a poisoned chalice, and he's being set up to fail. But this is sort of where we find ourselves in the game. Only 4 different factions are vying for the spice. The story is somewhat dislocated from the arch plot of the books, and basically it's a free market and political competition, where all 4 factions are competing to be king of the 4X Hill. So what is Dune Spice Wars? Dune Spice Wars is a real-time strategy game from the developers of the critically acclaimed video game that I never played, Northgard. According to the copy and pasted blurb on Steam, you must lead your faction and battle for control and dominance over the harsh desert planet of Arrakis, made famous by all those Dune books, films, TV shows, comics, lore wikis, fan clubs and fanfiction archives. Apparently there's some BDSM fanfiction, but the website looks shadier than a dark web porn sharing site and I was too shit scared to click on the link. I thought about it though. Developed by Shiro Games, the much lauded small French indie developer from Bordeaux, and published by Funcom and Shiro Games, Dune Spice Wars is being championed as the early access indie hit of 2022. In fact, people are shouting it from the fucking rooftops. Support Dune Spice Wars, support Shiro Games, support small indie studios. The situation, however, is slightly more nuanced than that. And when I say nuanced, obviously I mean that this is all horseshit. Dune Spice Wars is a real-time strategy game that probably would have struggled in the age before the internet, because I'm impressed with anyone who could pick up this game without any knowledge, outside information, outside tips and tricks guides, and stick with it long enough to master its idiosyncrasies and foibles. I would have categorised it as a real-time strategy game, but everyone keeps telling me off, wagging their finger in my face and explaining in a patronising tone, "Actually, it's a 4X game, oh my god, didn't you know that?" So yes my dear, Dune Spice Wars is a 4X game, don't you know? 4X stands for explore, expand, exploit, exterminate. You know, like playing against the AI in Command & Conquer, Homeworld or Age of Empires 4. Those real-time strategy games. Sorry, I didn't know the subtle distinctions between real-time strategy and 4X was such a critically important and passionate point. But pointing out the difference certainly makes a lot of people feel very, very self-important, so I will roll with it for now. It's basically a real-time strategy game, with a vastly more complicated economy and significantly more obtuse and obscure interactions between you and the enemy AI, about which the game can largely not be fucked to explain to the player. So really, 4X might stand for explore, expand, exploit, and the expletive of your choice. The mechanics of Dune Spice Wars go something like this, probably. You pick one of 4 factions, House Atreides, the Harkonnen, the Fremen, or the Smugglers. Fuck knows why, because the Fremen eventually became allies, perhaps integrated with House Atreides technically, and the smugglers were not a formal political force in the Imperium. But I guess video games need good guys and bad guys, and different sides. Although personally I would have preferred to play as the penis worm, you know, like Alien vs Predator. Anyway, you pick a side, pick your difficulty setting. I went with default, medium, probably a huge mistake. You get dropped into a map with the fog of war. You use your ornithopter to explore the area. It has auto scout, which is absolutely wonderful. You make little soldiers. You conquer other territories. Territories, ergo villages, either belong to another faction or they are basically locals. You expand, build an economy, kill people, and try not to get eaten by the penis worms. Now here is the big ticket issue. You have to do all of this whilst managing your resources and dealing with your enemies, and these two issues are hard to separate frankly, but I will focus on the material aspects before discussing the enemy ones. You have multiple resources to both acquire and manage, constrained by the fact that at best you can only build 5 modules in each village, with one village presiding over each territory. You have multiple resources to both acquire and manage, constrained by the fact that at best you can only build 5 modules in each village. You cannot have more than one of most of the modules in each village. What you build is often part dictated by the resources of that village's territory, and your building options are partially determined by your faction. The resources are spice, space drugs, water. Water is basically like beer, only rubbish. Plascrete. This is futuristic concrete, with part of the word plastic spliced in, so it sounds futuristic. Solari. These are science fiction pounds. Currency. Dollar bills, y'all. Manpower. Amazon workers basically. You recruit them, use them, and probably get a lot of them killed. Authority. This is your desert clout. Apparently you need clout to take over a village, even though you've already murdered their militia and surrounded them with armed forces. Influence. This determines how many votes you can cast in the corrupt Landsraad Parliament. Intel. These are the espionage equivalent of money. Odd concept, but basically you do spying stuff. You earn spying coins, which you can spend on doing more spying stuff. Fuel cells. They're basically Tesla batteries, only these ones don't spontaneously ignite. Spies. You earn spies over time, make them spy, and good things happen. Think Austin Powers. So yes, there are a lot of balls to juggle, and that is factoring in the fact that I've probably forgotten some. Like knowledge, which is also a currency which contributes to research, I think. Different factions have slight differences in their buildings and requirements, but it basically goes like this. If you have spice in a region as a resource, then a spice harvesting facility is the number one priority in that territory. I'm talking compulsory. You obviously want to maximise the output, so spice silos are a must too. You always need water, so building stills if the wind is stronger than level 3 is a must. You can never have enough plascrete, so you always want to be building a plascrete facility everywhere. You will constantly need a heavy supply of manpower for militia, troop units and replenishment, so a recruitment unit in every territory is practically mandatory. Fuel cells power your ornithopters and harvesting facilities, so you always need an energy factory. But you also need authority, influence and intel, so other buildings relating to espionage and the military are also required. Killing is fun, so it's nice to build a missile battery or two as well. And there you basically have a core aspect of the game mechanics. In any given village, there are usually 15 things you want to build, 7 or 8 things you have to build, but only 5 slots for you to build. And that right there is the rub. In a spy's territory, for example, 2 of 5 buildings are decided for you already. If you want some defences, water and plascrete production, you're fucked on space right off the bat. Rinse and repeat through all of your territories. Now add to this the other complications. It all interacts. Most buildings have running costs, usually in plascrete, solari, etc. Every single thing you build that creates one resource or benefit has some knock-on effect in running costs. I am sure you can see where this is all heading. Imagine if someone used a giant ball of fishing line and some superglue to connect every single button, dial or knob in a house. So when you turn the thermostat up, the windows open slightly. When you flush the toilet, a fire extinguisher gets activated. When you run the water tap, the electricity switches off. When you turn the television on, the electric collars on the hostages switch off. You spend a lot of time chasing your tail because every time you build something to solve one resource crisis, you can trigger one somewhere else. Now add all the other complicating factors. There are politics, a part of the game I barely understand. There might be a vote that benefits you, or doubles your running costs of certain resources. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this. You can upgrade your home base, which gives all kinds of wonderful benefits, but requires significant resources to keep working. There is espionage, which you can use to your advantage or have it used against you, like another faction stealing half of your production from somewhere, sending you into a resource crisis. Again. Plus, you can trade with the Sieches. The Sieches are the local Fremen DOS houses, which gives great benefits if you have enough surplus water to pay the fucking rates. Plus, you can trade with other factions, which is a bit hit and miss, but useful to be able to do. Plus, you have to pay the Chome Company a regular tax in spice, which you must hit, or get punished. Any surplus can be used to convert to Solaris, and on top of all of this, you have 4 extensive and important research trees. Now that's a lot of moving parts, and they're all interrelated. Now add to all of this, the enemy factions are trying to fuck you up too, and it's vastly more sophisticated than just plain old-fashioned military action. They might randomly launch a secret espionage attack and destabilise a village, causing a rebellion. They might be setting thumper traps that you can't see. They might be stealing your supplies. There are random teams of raiders who suddenly show up and fist fuck your villages. Sandstorms randomly appear that destroy your ornithopters or any troops caught out in the open. And all the while the enemy factions are attacking you, sabotaging you, voting on things that fuck your economy. And, randomly, penis worms are appearing trying to eat your harvesters, often devouring your whole army, and frequently fucking you up. And the important word in all of that is random. Now this is a video game, so whatever I say, it is absolutely guaranteed that some bright spark who beats the game twice a day on the hardest difficulty will pipe up with "Get good," or some other drooling disyllabic retort. However, for us mere mortals that don't play video games on ultra sweaty hardcore basement mode, the amount of random curveballs thrown at you by the game can quickly turn a textbook playthrough into a world-class shitshow. But more of this to come later. Much, much more. You can win the game based on several selectable conditions. Domination, you have annihilated everyone else. Governorship, you become governor and hold a title for a given period. Or by hegemony. I think it's some kind of abstract popularity contest. Or maybe something to do with Karl Marx. That rich intellectual kid that invented bread queues, gulags, and imprisoning all the farmers that could actually grow potatoes worth of fuck. Whatever it is, it's yet another resource to add to the growing fuck pile of resources you need to bean count in the game. The combat is simple and effective, as they say. The devil is largely in the detail here. Superficially, you make a little army of troops and run them at the enemy's little army of troops. You can't support many units at all, so the balls out combat has to be precisely applied and used wisely, often with only 4 to 8 units active in the field at any one time. As you understand it more, you realise that the buildings you have in your main base, the research you have done, the military buildings in that territory and the unit composition all stack up to turn your little army of idiots into elite Fuck Force 5. Also, keeping melee units attacking the ranged units shuts down their DPS. Similarly, outnumbering your enemy and focusing and DPSing down one unit at a time allows Lanchester's law to do its delightful mathematical work. Generally though, the combat is largely functional enough, simple enough, complicated enough and enjoyable enough. You put together a mix and match force, some melee and some ranged, doing a bit of micromanagement during the battle to optimise your force multipliers, and then rage quit when some random dust storm or some random penis worm wipes out your whole army. Because RNG. This game is not without its issues, but more of this later too. Functionality and fuckery. Well, right out of the box it runs pretty well. In fact, it runs phenomenally well for an early access indie title. Hasn't crashed and certainly passes my video game sweaty hand test. Basically, I reach down and put my hand over the hottest exhaust port on my PC case and see how hot the PC is running. That's called fucking science where I come from. I do get regular micro stutters and micro hangs. Nothing tragic, nothing game breaking, but it's far from buttery smooth. Something else you can technically use as a lubricant, although I wouldn't recommend it because the milk solids have a tendency to cook off and create fouling. It's not got that many buttons, nearly all of them work. It's a top-down strategy game. You're going to spend most of the time with your mouse in one hand and your beer in the other. I'm sure there are many hotkeys, and one day, when I grow up, I promise to find out what they are. Beyond the one single one I use, which is the most important one without any shadow of a doubt. Before you even consider buying this game, make sure you are both aware of and do not forget about the pause key. Hitting the spacebar not only pauses the game, but it transforms it from a hectic, how the fuck should I know that experience, into a leisurely, I'll just pause the game and spend 20 minutes looking at the perk tree and deciding what to do next experience. I shit ye not, my first 5 hours were spent without knowing the pause key existed, and the game entirely transformed for me once I discovered it by accident. It buys you breathing time to figure out what's going on, breathing time where you can take pause, scan the map, make decisions, read the many text boxes and the mouse over info, and figure out precisely what resources that tiny icon stands for, and usually figure out why you have none of it. Seriously, the pause button is essential unless you want the game to initially feel like being on a bobsled, with no time to think, comprehend or learn whilst you steadily accelerate towards your ultimate high-speed demise. Overall though, it's stable, fairly slick, well polished, and works just fine. Setting aside the odd micro stutter, especially considering it's allegedly early access. I have no idea what state it will eventually end up in, what will be added and what will be refined, but already it is widely considered to be a fully functioning, complete, playable experience. Some of the in-game functionality is spot on, some not quite there yet. For example, you can set your harvesters to auto recall, which is great. But this begs the question, why have auto recall turned off at all? It does not have auto deploy. It's great that you can set them to automatically run away when the penis worms arrive, but not so great that you have the perpetual chore of manually redeploying them after the worm has fucked off. If they're smart enough to know where the worm is, they're smart enough to go back to work, without waiting for the fucking union rep to come around to the canteen, slap their pornos out of their hands and kick their folding chairs out from underneath their lazy asses. You might not want to auto-deploy for situations where enemies are deliberately attacking your harvesters, I guess, which is a thing I never saw happen. Similarly, Why is auto recall not on by default? It's just a shag building a refinery, spamming it up with 4 crew, focusing on something else, only to realise that 200 manpower just fell down the shitter just because you forgot to turn on auto recall. There is no reason for it to be defaulted to off. What is the point of this? Is it a memory or a compliance check on the player? It's silly. Get rid. I guess I'll chalk this one down to not really thought through properly. Harvesters should auto-deploy. Harvesters should auto-recall if attacked. Harvesters should auto-redeploy when the threat has passed. If you want to add buttons to opt out, then fine. But those are the rules in the Bible of video games. Thou shalt not default thine video game to fuckhead settings, and thou shalt never fuck around thine player with evil fuckery that does not serveth the Lord of enjoyment. The ability to stack research topics is brilliant. You know, in video games where you have to research things and you always forget about it, then remember later and realise that you just wasted hours of research time doing nothing, and then you curse your own stupidity? That doesn't really happen here. You stack your current, second and third choice of research topics and the game progresses them in turn. You basically just have to go back periodically, make sure you still stand by your decision, and you can queue them differently if your priorities have changed. It's brilliant. It's like lining up a sequential research playlist. Very simple idea, very effective, and a nice quality of life addition. It's literally what should be the standard trope in video games when it comes to research. I had a few niggling issues with the UI and other game stuff. Double clicking to select all units of the same type seems to work when you click on the unit, but not on the unit's flag. That just selects the one you are moused over, which you do when you one click on it. Very occasionally pathfinding goes a bit stoned, and in the worst case scenario the odd unit will get stuck every few hours. Sometimes you'll click a group and 2 will go one way around an obstruction and the other 3 will go the other way, both converging on the same spot eventually, but effectively dividing your forces unnecessarily, and sometimes this has catastrophic consequences. Sometimes units seem to be a bit too eager to engage, aggroed by a single missile from miles away, and sometimes microing your soldiers during battles right on top of a village can be a bit fiddly, with overlapping unit boxes and all that shit. My main functionality gripe is the inconsistency with some of the in-game warning systems. Sometimes I got a warning about spice worms and I instantly ran, but it just chomped my entire army regardless. Other times I waited longer, ran and I was fine. Sometimes I told a unit to move and it got confused about pathfinding. I had to click to make it go wide, and by the time I'd micromanaged that one dude who got stuck, I'd lost him. On a few occasions my army was eaten by penis worms, and then I got a warning about worm activity flag up a fraction of a second after I lost all my dudes. Now, sometimes the loss of your units can turn the whole game on its axis, and that's not funny. You see, the game runs on such high tolerances that these little wig outs can literally ruin your playthrough. There is no denying that sometimes this game has some issues. I sued for a non-aggression pact with the smugglers to try and avoid splitting my forces because they'd attacked one of my villages. They kindly agreed. They did not, however, stop attacking my village. They also stacked up a force on another village. So there I was, in the same situation, only now they were waging war against my village with impunity under the flag of alleged truce. My only choice was to break my own treaty so I could fight them off, which naturally triggered the second stack to attack the other village with impunity. What is that about? Seriously, the game allowed a state to exist where I had successfully sued for peace, but let the army keep persisting to attack me, and force me to take the repercussions of fighting back by violating my own treaty. Lots of the units and vehicles in game are voiced, and it's generally nicely done. Not AAA standards, but it's got a lot of flavour. Sure, some of the encounters are text only, but it's all working nicely and nothing feels missing. I would, however, note that the difference between the best faction audio and the worst is a bit of a chasm. While some of it is authentic sounding and immersive, some of it is, well, a bit shit. A lot of the smuggler voices sound a little silly, not particularly like professionals, not even cosplay pirate standards of authentic. And don't get me started about the Freemans.
Ericus belonged to the Fremens. Ericus belonged to the Fremens. Ericus belonged to the Fremens.
They sound like a fucking parody Egyptian version of Gollum. Not kidding. What should be the coolest units in the game have this hilarious voice sample, and I shit you not, I shake my head every time I click on that unit. Oh, and whilst we're on the subject of authenticity, there is no weirding modules that I could see in the game. What's that about? If Shiro made a Star Wars game, would they remove the lightsabers and the metal brass? I don't think so. So what is my overall take on Dune Spice Wars? Well, it's complicated, as Jada Pinkett Smith said to her divorce lawyer. I have a love-hate relationship with this game. I've had long gaming sessions where I've really enjoyed it, but I've also had sessions end in infuriation. Infuriation frequently caused by some aspect of randomness. RNG, invisible or unknown game mechanics, which T-bones me, or when some clunky random event gets triggered by the game's AI. Now I get it, random events happen in video games, but it feels a bit different than that. So let me explain using some of my aborted playthroughs as an example. Here are a bunch of my false starts. Started out okay, then my entire army was eaten by a penis worm. Working smarter this time, but made some fuck up with my buildings and research and got locked into a downward spiral of resource deficits. Decided to spam build troopers and steal all the nearby villages. Was looking at the map in the north for about 30 seconds. Scrolled back down, my entire army was killed by a dust storm. Got locked into another resource deficit death spiral. Finally did a decent playthrough, and despite being clearly away from the worm sign, still managed to get half my army eaten by a sandworm. But luckily the other half survived, long enough to be steamrollered by a conveniently timed spontaneous Harkonnen full stack assault. My first 5 playthroughs resulted in heading down an entirely unrecoverable dead end, lasted less than an hour apiece, and on each occasion I most likely locked myself into complete loss conditions within the first 10 minutes of play. Not gonna lie, when you first start playing this game it feels a bit like whack-a-mole, where every other mole is spiked with a small but highly devastating charge of C4 explosive. There is no reason to know why you're doing the wrong thing, the game just lets you crack on your magical mystery tour of fucking up, only to point out that the first turn you took was wrong. You left the yellow brick road a few minutes after heading out, and you've been unwittingly royally fucked for a rather long time now. And then there are the feedback loops, based on invisible or not understood mechanics. I could be ticking along top of the world and suddenly my resource glut switched into a deficit, and this can cause a cascade failure. I simply just don't understand how I can spam plascrete factories and recruitment centres and sometimes they're shitting supplies out of the sky. Then with no visible issues, they all suddenly go into the red and are in deficit, and when they do, you are precisely out of all the resources you need to fix the problem. I have no issues with games being hard. Some of my favourite games are very hard. Kingdom Come Deliverance, Fallout New Vegas on survival mode. Only fuck. I guess my issue with the current structure of the game is this. There is a ton of stuff to learn, a lot of highly complex and convoluted systems, and a huge amount for the player to figure out on the fly. So far so good. There are however core principles to the setup of your empire which are essential and non-negotiable, but the game neither tells you, warns you or provides you a means to understand, other than by letting you run your playthrough into the ground. I can't remember ever starting an RTS game and abandoning 5 playthroughs 5 times in a row, with each one lasting less than an hour. Add to this, I think there's a bit of an information problem with this game. I'm not quite sure how they're going to fix this precisely, because there's a barrage of different modifiers constantly at work in the game, and lots of different occasions where the game quotes figures at you. To use a very simple example, there was this time I wasn't making enough plascrete. I decided to make a plascrete factory. The little box in the build menu said something like, makes plus 30 plascrete. So I built it. And instead of having something like -6 plascrete production, I logically had about -5.4 plascrete production. In terms of industrial economics, what the fuck is that? The little box said plus 30 plascrete, and this was not an isolated occurrence. I needed an extra 10 or something, I built the right factory, but this did not translate into production. Sometimes barely making a difference, and here is what I think is going on. There is a ton of buffs and debuffs, modifiers and penalty factors all ticking away in the background, all affecting your resource production. I don't think anyone has a clue if these modifiers are additive, cumulative, compounding, and which ones get applied when, and in which order, and which ones affect which. Are 2 -10% modifiers on 100 equal to this, or this? Now, there are a lot of modifiers all working together. However, that little box in the build menu will keep saying plus 30 plascrete. And that's not what is going to actually happen. It gives you the static, unchanging base increase. The reality is you will still be screwed. Most of the plus 30 will be swallowed up in debuffs and penalties. Maybe it needs an additional modified number on the build menu next to the hard number. Maybe some of the penalties are interacting wildly. Maybe I'm very, very stupid indeed. Who knows? But the game said I would get plus 30 plascrete. Where has my fucking plascrete gone? Because getting plus 0.4 plascrete is frankly taking the piss. The economy and systems are a bit like balancing a house of cards, with very little leeway, flexibility or any ability to change course. At one point I suddenly ended up with a plascrete shortage, so I deconstructed a water facility to get some plascrete back in order to build a plascrete factory. Said plascrete was promptly gobbled up by maintenance costs because I was in deficit, and so before I could do anything, the resources were gone. I couldn't build the plascrete factory, plus now I had a water shortage as well. I did feel a bit like the game in a way showed a slight casual disregard for the player's time, inasmuch as it forces the player to make wild choices about what to build where there is scant guidance or clues how to proceed, knowing damn well that even the slightest mistake may well doom your entire playthrough. And then, on top of that, it might throw some penis worms at you just for good measure. Basically, I think Dune Spice Wars needs to provide the player with a little more guidance, information or structure in early game, or provide some ability to buffer these poor choices or flexibility with converting resources. It's just too damn easy, or in fact most likely, that you'll have to rinse and repeat a lot of trial and error playthroughs, or just accept the fact you might have to read guides about how to play the game in advance. Maybe I shouldn't have played it on medium, maybe people like this shit, I don't know. It just felt a bit like the game lets you fuck it up, but lets that fuck up play out slowly over 30 to 60 minutes, even though a developer could have looked over your shoulder in minute 4, assessed your decisions thus far, shrugged, laughed, and informed you that you had already lost. There is a thin line between trial and error as a learning process in video games and simply letting the player fumble in the dark and fail repeatedly with no clue or tells about how best to proceed. But for me personally, the kick in the balls was the randomly generated shit. I'd finally mastered the basics of the game and was having a very successful playthrough. Everything was tickety-boo. So for no reason at all, the game chucks a rebellion at me. A totally happy society. Everything in the green. No shortages of anything. I'm beating off enemy attacks and all is fine and well in the world. So the game just decides to notify me that my most far-flung town just spontaneously decided to rebel. I don't know. Perhaps they were just tired of being so well fed, well watered and well defended and just decided to say fuck this, let's burn down critical infrastructure just to tank the economy. Perhaps they were infiltrated by Antifa or BLM. But this pushed the tipping point, slightly increasing my overheads, diminishing my water, reducing my plascrete and pivoted a perfectly decent playthrough into a chore. These randomly generated hand grenades the game lobs through the window need to be addressed because they don't adhere to logical rules and can derail a playthrough where you've done everything right thus far. Oh, and it didn't help that the notification of the rebellion and unrest all happened immediately at the same time. Just like sometimes you get a notification of a sandworm about 8 nanoseconds before it pops its head out of the ground and eats your entire army. Or a few seconds afterwards. And here is the thing, maybe this is paranoia, maybe this is me trying to rationalise my failure and lack of skill, maybe I'm trying to see meaning where there is none. But I just couldn't shake the feeling that the game has a set of events triggers, random events, events rules and trigger points where it spontaneously just threw shit at me for the sake of keeping things interesting. And I said interesting, but really I meant fucky. Because sometimes these random triggered or semi-scripted events could very much derail a lot of hard work and cause huge setbacks, or literally cause so many problems that you feel like reloading an earlier save or just restarting. And that is something I normally never ever do. It's just these little moments where the game's AI seemed hell-bent on stopping me doing something, like there was some scripted logic at play. One playthrough I didn't secure a source of fuel cells early game and it became my critical priority. Then, as if by magic, the entire game threw everything at me to gatekeep the one territory nearby that was available with a source of fuel cells. Harkonnens attacked me, raiders hit another base, the Fremen started launching relentless attacks, penis worms and sandstorms were coming at me from every direction, and it just felt a bit contrived. Like the time I got stuck in this weird feedback loop where I wanted to take this base, but every time my army got close, the AI kept triggering a rebellion in one of my other bases a ways away. Literally, every time I tried to take this other village of theirs, it would spam rebellion on this other village of mine, forcing me to bring my forces back to deal with that. I got locked into this cycle for more turns than I can even remember, going back and forth, yet somehow this practically broken enemy had sufficient resources to constantly spam rebellion on that village every few minutes. I guess I just don't quite trust what the game is doing behind the curtain. The game is without doubt very busy, especially prior to finding the pause button. I guess I'll just have to own that one. There is always more things to do than time available, more places to be than your army can be at once, and unless you decide to build airports, they will be running from pillar to post, dealing with bandits, enemy skirmishers or outright battling for your very existence. The finite building slots was a real game defining feature. With only 5 max slots per base, you had to make the proverbial tough choices. The limit of what you can do in each town or village resulted in me adopting certain tactics, rightly or wrongly. I kept all my expansion organised and connected, so I presented one consolidated, mutually supporting border to all hostiles as much as possible. This meant I could keep the enemy on my doorstep in front of me and dispense with certain military buildings at the rear, freeing the slots up for other things. I also realised that any towns that are close enough to be within range of each other's missile batteries are the holy grail of defence. If you train militia in each and have a missile battery in each, if one is attacked, usually the combination of the militia defenders in the village and the neighbouring village's missile battery raining down pain onto the enemy, usually made them mostly self-defending, because the aggressor could not survive the withering missile attacks long enough to capture the village, sometimes to even win the battle. I also came to appreciate that spice is very literally king. If you can get a shit ton of spice harvesting rolling, that is half the battle won, right there. Spice means you pay your dues, and don't get sanctioned. Spare spice means money. Money solves a lot of problems, and you can trade money for everything. Obviously, you need lots of water and plascrete, and manpower, fuel cells and the rest of that shit too. But if you were sitting on a huge spice stockpile with bags of money on your lap, you can buy your way out of most problems, which I did routinely. I don't know if the game cheats, and if so, by how much, but certainly on one playthrough I started tactically buying out an enemy's plascrete so it had none. And I certainly imagined that it made a difference. The troops level up with XP, ergo battles fought and damage done. I personally think this is mandatory in this kind of game, and it always pains me when this mechanic is not present. I think it helps you get attached to your units if they level up through the game with you. The levelling up, however, is very slow. They don't level up much, and frankly it's hard to care when one mistimed worm sign warning means they are sadly destined to be shat out of a penis worm in about a week's time. Away from your areas, troops start to run out of supplies and will eventually start taking HP damage. This is a great mechanic, although somewhat annoying if you briefly fail to notice that they're moving across no man's land to some target that dies. They lose their waypoint, stop walking, and cook off in the sun. I have literally managed to have entire armies just expire because of a moment's inattention. How about an auto recall on those idiots? Be warned, there is stuff in the game that you will quite literally not know exists. It's actually worth pausing the game and going around clicking on everything so that you can see what is just a thumbnail or counter and what is something you can interact with. As a general rule, it's worth periodically pausing and repeating this process whilst also looking very carefully at every single pane, info sheet and data tab. Didn't know I could add crew to harvesters to increase production. Didn't know I could trade with other factions. Didn't know I could arrange non-aggression packs. Didn't know I could keep some spice back and pocket the difference in money. See this? I can click on this. See this? I can click on that and shit happens.
Greetings.
Same here. Who would have thunk it? Even here. The TLDR is that you will be playing this for a long time and things will be going badly wrong for you until you notice some pissy little tab, spot the text, realise that weird thing next to it is actually a button, and scream in rage because you just realise that you've been hamstringing yourself for hours, if not days, by not setting something up correctly. There is a bit of an interaction feedback loop going on here. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's not fun. And when I say not fun, I mean like when you're short of one thing, so you build something that makes it, which in turn makes you short of something else, and every single thing you try and do to fix the problem daisy chains into more problems. Imagine flying a fighter jet. You're a bit fast, so you slow down, but that reduces your lift, so you start to lose altitude, so you have to pull the nose up a bit to compensate, and then you realise that because of the slower speed, the crosswind will affect your direction of flight, so you have to adjust your course accordingly. Well, I guess to a degree it all becomes automatic with enough experience. And so will this game. Well, I'd like to say that Dune Spice Wars is that kind of massively interacting feedback loop, but frequently it feels a bit more like this. You're flying a bit fast, so you try and slow down, but the throttle handles come off in your hand, so you have to operate it with your foot, and when you try and reduce your lift, the fucking stick snaps in half, so you have to open the little hatches on the canopy and operate the ailerons by reaching your arms out of the fucking cockpit and manually tilting them. Only now you know you're fucked, so you try and use your other foot to operate the radio to send out a mayday distress signal, and in doing so, accidentally kick the ejection seat handle, and up you go. Only because both of your legs are outstretched and your arms are stuck out of the plane, when you eject, all your limbs get torn off and just your arse and your head leave the plane intact, and everything else goes its own way. Dune Spice Wars is half fun, half exercise in being fucked around, and until you have figured a lot of shit out, you will be constantly firefighting micromanagement crisis after crisis. Certainly if you start on medium. At one point I had 4 levelled up spice mines. I had already won by the hegemony criteria, but I was carrying on playing. I had a shit ton of bases, recruitment centres in nearly every town, only 6 active units of soldiers, and elected to all but one office of the Landsrad. Yet somehow I was still broke ass poor. Barely had any plascrete, had a manpower shortage, and then, right then, some faction just decides to spontaneously start orchestrating rebellions in perfectly happy and content towns, thus spiralling my economy straight down the shitter. I appreciate the game needs to keep things exciting and keep forward momentum, but sometimes it feels, at least, like there is some set of rules in the background where the logic goes something like this. Is player doing fine? If answer equals yes, put a stop to that. Now maybe as I play more and learn more about the game systems, I will develop more of an economic buffer to weather the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that the game keeps throwing at me. But certainly setting out learning this game, the random fuck you generator did seem to wait for you to finally get served at the bar, fill your tray with glasses of beer, and just as you walk towards your table, stick its AI boot out and send you and the beers sprawling across the floor. At no point can I say that I felt like I was in a state of equilibrium. And this in turn was an issue with the spice production. I just couldn't wrap my head around this at first and assumed I was doing something wrong because whatever I did, I was only ever barely hitting my tax delivery. Then a point came where I had 4 fully upgraded spice refineries, spice silos in both territory and the neighbouring towns, 4 dudes per harvester, pornos and beer in every fucking cab, but the more spice I produced, the more they just kept raising the quota. This is not fun. This reminded me of Homeworld Cataclysm, where they level scaled each successive mission based on how many ships and how much resources you had at the end of the previous mission. Essentially the developer thought, hey, this is cool, we'll balance the game each mission, so it's always a challenge. But the players thought, this sucks a dead tramp's cock, because whatever I do, nothing gets better, I just get punished for being successful, because the better you do, the more the game stacks the odds against you. And this is a core issue with Dune Spice Wars, its difficulty scaling is all on the piss. Now this is a game with difficulty settings, so theoretically this should not be too hard to sort out, and I appreciate that the developers are trying to force the player to relentlessly gain more territories, so they keep ramping up your spice quota to force you to steal it from other factions. I appreciate it, and I think it's horseshit. It's horseshit because it's an artificial scaling element that falls outside of the rules of the game system. It's breaking the game's own rule set, it's breaking the law within the game, it's breaking the rules of the Dune universe. It's nothing more complicated than, we are going to arbitrarily keep raising taxes because reasons, and this will force the player to take more territories. Now if you want to pull that kind of stunt on ultra hard mode, fine. If you want to do it on hard mode, I guess that's okay-ish. I'm probably never going to play this game on hard, but on medium, I call foul. On a standard default difficulty, I should be able to expand my spice production in order to have more spice, not just bigger bills. So yeah, my experience with the game was fun a lot of the time, right up until the moment where I felt the scripting, AI or RNG was quite literally screwing with me for sport. When the game did this, it felt like there was a dislocation between input and outcome. I'm sure that a large part of it was factors or mechanics that I don't understand. I'm sure that many people will love this shit regardless and love the punishing nature of it. I'm sure some people like their girlfriends to tie them to the radiator and hit them with a belt. But personally, it was these moments where the game kinda lost me. For no logical or discernible reason, the playthrough turned on me. Randomness and hidden mechanics need to be managed in video games, because if they're too aggressive, they remove the relationship between action and reaction, and it becomes a game of chance. Not to mention you become consciously aware of them if they're that clunky, and it breaks the immersion. And maybe that's why I can't quite come to certain conclusions about Dune Spice Wars, because it's like playing chess in a thunderstorm. Things are going fine until you get hit by lightning, and I'm not sure how the lightning strikes enhance the game at all. I tried to do research into the hidden mechanics in RNG, but I got nothing. But on the subreddit I did see an interesting comment about the game from one of the players. The game likes rolling logs under your feet. Nailed it. Dune Spice Wars is Dune in name only. There, I said it. Sure, it's called Dune, it's got spice mining and lots of Dune stuff, but I just wasn't feeling it. In fact, I think Dune Spice Wars is perfectly analogous to the recent Dune movie remake. The original movie was better. I know that will upset people, and that's fine. Seriously, the first film had issues that I happily tolerate because it was awesome in many other ways. I'm not saying the new film is bad, it's fine. It's not 6 fucking Oscars fine though. It's got Altai throat singing in it, which is nice. But most of us midnight YouTube rabbit hole explorers have been into Altai throat singing for years. Now it's fucking everywhere apparently. It was in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, Last Oasis, Ghost of Tsushima, and now it's in the new Dune movie. If you want to seem a bit arthouse, a bit deep, come across like you read posh books and know about obscure stuff, the new go-to pretend you are sensitive and clever quick fix is bung in some Altai throat singing and talk about it in the interview because the ladies will be impressed. Altai throat singing is quickly becoming a meme. Look, the new film looks very, very pretty and it's all done nicely. But fucking hell, it's bland compared to the original, even if David Lynch's Dune is a bit of a mess. And you have to stare at Sting's oiled up creeper bod. But damn, the OG Dune was vastly more visceral. The Harkonnen literally fit people with heart plugs so you can yank them out, and they bleed out almost instantly whilst you rub their chests. Glorious. The film now is more family friendly, it's more streaming service friendly, and focuses more on Chani, and intends to make her the protagonist of the next movie. They removed the gore, and it also has a spectacularly shit performance from Rebecca Louisa Ferguson Sundstrom. She had so few fucks to give about the film that she refused to read the books, fundamentally got her character back to front, and delivered possibly the worst, most cack-handed, off-the-mark performance in any modern movie of recent times. She was supposed to be a mentally trained, psychically bullet-hard elite sister of the Bene Gesserit, but sadly, because she was too busy doing interviews telling everyone how fucking great she is, she rocked up to the set, did what she wanted to do, and got the character 100% arse about face, completely and comprehensively wrong. I'm talking on a scale of, imagine if Henry Cavill turned up on the set of The Witcher and instead of being a fan of both the books and the game, he simply declared that he had a gut feeling about the character, and instead of being a troubled warrior, he started to simp, cry in all the scenes, and curled up in the fetal position, and started having little sobs. Well, that would be better than Rebecca, I'm better than Fax Ferguson. Seriously, I like the new film, but only because it's a 70% version of another film I liked more. This was better. He was better. He was better. He was better. She was better. She was hotter. The original Dune is a film where I fancied Paul Atreides' missus and his mum. That's a 2-for-1 bargain that shouldn't be sneered at. I always think the amount of remakes and reboots are a good measure of how creatively bankrupt a culture is. When a society has run out of things to say, or is between cultural paradigms, either everyone is too shit scared or lacks the imagination to make original things and write original stories. Right now in the West we are churning out more reboots than ever before, and that's why the new Dune reboot probably got made. Well, Dune Spice Wars is Dune in name only and misunderstands the source material. Not as badly as Rebecca, Are My Nails Dry Yet Ferguson, but nevertheless, it does.
I read a script and I will automatically have a gut feeling towards it. The philosophy is following that in combination with how the dialogue goes with the director who I'm going to work with. If those two align, it's a very good start.
Well, your gut feelings do not trump facts, information, story, and books, love. She made it up, and she fucked it up. I'm sorry, but she reminds me of Chad Palomino from the movie Living in Oblivion. That art house film with the midget in it. The one that got all the other midgets fired from their seasonal acting jobs. You know, the midget that all the other midget actors hate now. I wish I was joking. But yes, Dune Spice Wars has the themes but not the substance really. I just didn't feel it. Just didn't feel very Dune-ish while I was playing. Frankly, this game could have been called Alien Space Potato Farmer. They could have replaced the spice harvesting with growing alien space food crops, replaced the harvesters with futuristic hover tractors, had different potato farming factions, replaced thumpers with robo-scarecrows, and you all wage war for domination in the highly competitive and cutthroat space potato market. He who controls the potato controls the universe. Because nothing in the game structure is defined by the Dune franchise. Sure, it's got lots of Dune words, deserts, and spice, but in every other regard it deviates from the Dune story really, so why call it Dune and give it Dune livery and logos? You can glue a Mercedes hood ornament on a Land Rover, it doesn't turn it into a G-Series. But you know, the marketing possibilities for Alien Space Potato Farmer, believe it or not, are considerably less than a Dune franchise game being semi-launched in the aftermath of a highly popular, if overhyped, Dune movie reboot. And that is why this game is called Dune and not Alien Space Potato Farmer. He who controls the franchise controls the money bags. And this neatly brings me on to the issue of early access and small studio hype, marketing and financing. I think Shiro Games deserve support, and despite my endless niggles with Dune Spice Wars, I think it is literally a superb and impressive achievement for a small studio. I can gripe about it all day long, but I still had fun, and it's got a whole heap of potential. Even in early access, this game is vastly more complete, polished and playable than even Total War games are these days. Maybe not as expansive, but certainly regarding its condition, and it's also completely fuckery free. No loot boxes, no DLC, no shenanigans. But we need to be careful about the pressure of not saying anything critical because it's a small independent developer and a poor little early access game. Independent studios and early access games are not inherently the good guys who are beyond reproach. These days the situation is more complicated than good guys and bad guys, although I acknowledge the pressure not to be mean to small studios who face a tough time in today's marketplace, swimming with the sharks in order to get a publishing deal. However, it's been a long-standing anxiety of mine, one that I have discussed before in videos, that AAA studios will eventually abuse crowdfunding and early access and the good nature of gamers as a means to stealth their games into the marketplace, flying under the banner of being a worthy cause. I mean, what better Trojan horse than AAA publishers shifting all of risk onto the customer and the developer, whilst masquerading as a noble indie project that deserves the support of players. That's a pretty fucking cool plan, right? AAA publishers making the customer feel morally obliged to support their business plans. In fact, it's so cool, it's going to happen eventually, if it hasn't already. The players feel morally obliged to support the little struggling indie studio. The AAA publishers get to lurk in the background, hoovering up the profits, and the customer gets to absorb all the risk of what is essentially a live service game disguised as an early access title. I was so proud of coming up with this plan that I'm quietly confident that I could consider a career as an evil video game publisher. In fact, the plan is so evil, I'm amazed I thought of it before the AAA publishers did. Or did I? I make no claims about what is going on in this specific instance with this specific game, and any speculation is entirely legally non-binding, theoretical, and I am merely talking through my hypothetical thought processes. But let me take you on a little speculative, hypothetical journey together. Whilst I was reviewing this game, I was having fun. It's a decent enough game. I liked it. Insanely over-delivering for an indie studio. But a few things felt a bit strange. Why did this project end up with such a small studio? Why is this game so uniformly hyped? Why am I hearing the same catchphrases everywhere? Why are small YouTubers deconstructing criticism of the game? Why am I seeing the same uniform mantras being repeated everywhere? You must support Shiro Games. You must support Dune Spice Wars. You must support indie devs. If there is one thing I'm really suspicious of in the video game industry, it's when everyone starts chanting the same mantra. When everyone is on the same page. Because uniformity in messaging always smells like PR to me, and I've experienced this before. If you do not support this studio, there will not be a sequel. If you do not support this game, there will be no more content developed. Basically, if you do not give us your money, bad things will happen. This is Public Relations 101 in the video game industry. It's a managed message. It's a red flag that serious PR work is going on in the background and in the community, on social media and in the press. It's a red flag for manipulation. Remember when Ubisoft decided to break their own promises and start rolling out microtransactions and loot boxes in The Division 1? Remember that? Everyone, and I literally mean nearly every last motherfucker, was repeating the same mantra. We have to support Ubisoft against the hostile takeover. Everyone was peddling this same bullshit. Basically, put up with this shit now because Ubisoft needs the extra cash flow to fight off the hostile takeover bid from Vivendi, and if that happens, things will be much, much worse. Well, what actually happened? What actually turned out to be true? Certainly none of that bullshit. It was PR. They were just trying to make lots of extra revenue to inflate their share value because behind the scenes they were negotiating a backdoor share deal with Tencent, the giant megacorporation who data shares with the People's Republic of China. Basically, we were encouraged to take a hit for the team so rich fucks could get even richer. And at no point did Eve, my staff keep resigning because of sexual assault scandals, Guillemot, ever say, don't worry guys, we're selling a 5% stake of the company to the communists. We're going to be minted after this. Ha ha ha. I don't like it when organic self-organising social communities suddenly all start behaving like ants in an ant colony and begin chanting mantras in support of corporations. It always turns out to be something dodgy. Obviously, I'm being paranoid, right? Well, just to make sure it was just me and my tinfoil wearing hat habits running away with myself, I decided to do a bit of research. I will propose some questions, and here's a simple starter question for 10 points. How the fuck did a tiny video game developer in Bordeaux manage to get the video game rights to a multi-billion-dollar franchise like Dune? All timed perfectly to coincide with the aftermath of a multi-billion-dollar Hollywood remake of the movie. Did they just trundle over to the dude who owns the rights, clutching a bottle of slightly overrated red wine, a basket of French bread, and the spare change collection from the swear jar in the office? I don't think so. And I don't think the person holding the rights thought, I know, these rights are worth tens of millions of dollars. Instead of auctioning them, I'll go to fucking France and start knocking on doors until I randomly find a small indie game developer and just give it to them. Brilliant plan. Second question. Who is paying off the YouTubers? Now, I've covered games awash with shill YouTubers, so I have a pretty good nose for sniffing out their stink. I knew Naughty Dog were using a PR company to bar off reviewers on YouTube, because if you watch enough of the reviews, you spot that they're using the same catchphrases, the same hot takes, and same talking points, sometimes during the precise same section of gameplay. It's pretty obvious they're reading off a list of key talking points the second you start actively looking for it. And when you do spot that, you know that someone chucked that YouTuber between £1 and £20,000 to hype the game and pretend they give a fuck. Third question. How come everyone is repeating the same mantra? That's some pretty heavy duty expensive public relations operation to get an entire community and the YouTubers on the same page, right? Everyone is on message repeating the same "you must support Shiro Games" mantra. It's too spooky. It's like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Well, at this point I'm sure some of you have come up with your own answers to these questions and no doubt think that I am wearing a tinfoil hat. But in this particular case, you're wrong. I do wear tinfoil hats though, but I ain't wrong about something odd going on here. And FYI, tinfoil also protects you from microwave weapons. Just so you know to keep a stockpile of it.
Now, just like before, we have microwaves in front, but nothing in back. In front, nothing in back.
And before anyone bleats on about nobody pays off YouTubers to make bent reviews, well, yes they do. Absolute fact. Not only does it happen, it's more common than not.
Bribery. Does it happen in the video game industry? You bet your bottom dollar, because it just happened to me. You usually have to send them the video ahead of time and they give you the green lights for publication. He says that it's a little bit too negative and I didn't focus on the important topics that they presented in the demo. He also includes a huge checklist of stuff that I should talk about, and when I glanced down the list, I noticed they're all like great things about the game. So I realized the jig is up at this point, right? So basically he bribed me and he said, well, if you go along with the parade, we'll hook you up in the future. And that is not what I consider an appropriate response from a company that's handling a big time game.
Sorry to tell you that Santa isn't real and the Easter Bunny isn't a virgin, but chances are that many, if not most, of the gaming YouTubers you watch get paid by publishers and advertisers. I know this because it's true. And I know this because sometimes they even try and pay me off. Even with my horrific reputation and being blacklisted by several publishers, a couple of times a month someone fires me a random email, deliberate or accidental, asking me to shill their game. So, with all this being considered, I started sniffing around. And yes, somebody is dropping a ton of cash on promotional partnership arrangements.
This video is sponsored on behalf of Dune Spice Wars. Please consider clicking the link in the description and the top comment of the video to take you to the Steam page for the game where they'll know I sent you. It greatly helps. Don't just search it, click the link. Dune Spice Wars is a real-time 4X game.
Dune Spice Wars is a new real-time strategy game with some 4X elements from the creators of Northgard. And as you can see, it's set in a fairly dangerous place. Welcome to my beginner's guide. A huge shout out to Shiro Games who gave me early access and sponsored this video.
This video is sponsored by Shiro Games. Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today we're taking a look at the all-new Dune Spice Wars, the real-time 4X game set in the Dune universe that just released into early access. If you're interested in learning more about the game beyond this video or picking it up for yourself, don't hesitate to check out the link in the description and pinned comment down below.
4X! I cannot wait. Get out of here. Somebody made not only a strategy game of Dune, but a 4X game and even a Dune video game. Get out of here. This is perfectly made for me. Thank you to publisher Funcom, developer Shiro Games for making this and partnering up with us because we're going to play this for you today. I'm so excited. 4X real-time strategy game from the developers of the critically acclaimed Northgard.
Look, credit to all these guys for being honest and upfront about their videos being paid advertisements. I am not anti-capitalist, and some of my favourite porn has been lifted from adverts. But let's be real here. If they're involved with Shiro Games financially, signed contracts, and like free money, I don't think we can rely on anyone's objectivity after that point. I can't stress enough, I only showed clips from these guys because they all had the credibility and integrity to be transparent that their videos are sponsored by Shiro Games. My point is, if you take money to promote a game, you're promoting it, not assessing it, reporting on it, or being critical about it. Now, I don't want to damn Dune Spice Wars for being what might potentially just be the case that in this specific instance, their promotional partners are being honest and following the rules. This shit happens all the time, and mostly the YouTubers don't ever mention that they're on the payroll. So temper everything I'm saying through that lens. But with all this in mind, how many people took the paycheck and did not admit that they're promotional partners with this game? Because the narrative around this game is pretty tight across all platforms. And believe me when I say that most YouTubers, even in the current climate, are entirely deceptive about their relationship with video game publishers and studios. And frankly, merely the fact you have a relationship affects your impartiality. If you're getting paid, well, you just ain't impartial, full stop. YouTubers will frequently make excuses, rationalise the payment in their own heads, say shit like, I like Ubisoft games anyway, or merely brush it all off with statements like, yes, Activision/EA/Bethesda did fly me out to a few places and give me some nice things, but I can honestly promise you it did not affect my review or opinions in any way. You can trust me, guys. Or an even more common one these days, the publishers work through intermediary promotional companies so that the YouTubers can look you straight in the eye and say, I did not get paid by the publisher. Which is technically true, because actually they were getting paid off by the promotional company who was acting as a go-between. To all of this, I would calmly retort, fuck off. It's called a promotional budget for a reason. If you ain't promoting the game, they ain't spending the money. Capitalism, yo. Someone has a big fat checkbook hard-on out there for Dune Spice Wars. So, to recap, how did Shiro Games get the rights? Who is paying off the YouTubers? Who is bankrolling the PR operation? Because sure as shit smells, Shiro Games doesn't have the budget for all this. Well, Shiro Games is the studio making the game. It's being published by Funcom. Funcom bought the rights back in 2019. And drumroll please, Tencent bought Funcom in 2020. Tencent bought a 95.11% share of Funcom in July 2020. So Funcom isn't Funcom anymore. Funcom is now Tencent. And Tencent is possibly the biggest single entertainment and video games corporation on the planet. Tencent is also heavily linked to and hardwired into the Chinese Communist Party. Now I'm sure there is some overlap in lead times and development times, and maybe this game was well underway before Tencent bought out Funcom. But Tencent has owned it all for 2 years now. I don't think that Tencent, the largest video game publisher on planet Earth with assets worth $500 billion, really should be bankrolling games on Steam, marketing them as early access, hiring PR companies to play the poverty card, and promoting the mantra of support independent video games. Do you? I think this is all a little bit dishonest, really. Support indie developers? Fuck off. The local McDonald's might be a franchise run by a family, but if they started describing their McDonald's as a family business, I'd tell them to fuck off too. Look, I would speculate that Shiro Games signed up as effectively a subcontractor in all this. I'm sure they have none of the power and only get a little bit of the profits. They signed some contracts so they could get work, make a video game and keep their very skilled developers in jobs. They're a small fish, swimming in a large shark pool. They are a tiny developer striking the best deals they can to stay and work. And let's be honest, I think it all worked out rather well in the end. Shiro Games did a good job, and I'm not laying any fault or blame at their door. Seriously, I am not. But anyone characterising Dune Spice Wars as some kind of noble indie video game project that is struggling to make ends meet, so they had to make the game early access because there's no grown-up funding and everyone is poor and the CEO has a fucking dog on a string and sleeps at the homeless shelter. Well, anyone playing the indie card is either consuming too much propaganda or propagating it. This game might be listed as early access, but it's published by a fucking mega corporation, and our indie hero emotions are being leveraged against us for profit. It's a hero myth, and the financial reality is the opposite. I can't definitely say what is really going on here in specific detail. I can only follow the money, but it certainly looks to me like Tencent is pissing down all of our backs and telling us that it's raining. I think this is really a live service game dressed up like an appealing indie project. It's got a little pretty early access dress, a cheeky little indie developer wink, a cute low budget smile, but it's fucking jailbait, and if anyone had taken 5 seconds to look, they would have seen the pimp, Tencent, standing on the street corner behind her. Dune Spice Wars is a decent enough game, but just like the movie Reboot, it's not the hot shit that it's hyped up to be. I have a lot of time for Shiro Games, and they earned their fans. But easy with the indie dev narrative because it's really not what's going on here, is it? Well, once again, my quick 20-minute video snowballed into a bloated, meandering monologue, so I will wrap this shitburger up and throw it at the windscreen. I think maybe an issue with this game that may well limit its appeal is that there is not really a traditional learning curve. It's basically a case of fail for a long time, then fail some more, and then you will have a moment of enlightenment and clarity, which will last about 20 minutes until the next penis worm eats your entire army and screws up your playthrough. Judging from its popularity on Steam at least, lots of people seem perfectly content with this. But a proportion of players, myself included, seem to be griping about the same shit. And that's approximately 1/5 of the players. The curveballs and the random sabotage of the RNG and scripting. I wasn't going to mention this because I didn't capture the footage, but I swear at one point that I spotted the AI magically making a few enemy units appear out of nowhere, just to fuck me up. Then I spotted another couple of reports of people claiming the same thing. And no, I'm not talking about stealth units, I'm talking about bang. Where the fuck did they come from? Sure, if I was better at the game, had bigger buffers of the myriad of resources, it would be less of a deal. But that's the thing, this game has no progressive learning curve. You have to hammer it a lot, do a lot of learning, before you even begin to get to grips with it. And during that time you will fail a lot from things entirely out of your control. Ain't nobody got time for that. I think Dune Spice Wars is a great game on many levels. It's a decent RTS. 4X if you want to talk Flash. It's fun, engaging, you blow shit up and do espionage spy stuff. It's pretty looking and very, very engrossing. In fact, it's been a while since I've played a game that has had me head down, nose pressed up against the screen, obsessing with microing my shit and scanning the land for more free stuffs I can snaffle. Strangely, whilst it has the pace spot on, it's the scaling, and most likely the scaling as per how it relates to difficulty settings that is basically, how can I put it, wrong. You might like it, lots of people do. 79% of people do. Lots of people like being forced into compulsory, aggressive, expansionist playstyles. But this is a strategy game, right? I should be able to deploy strategically. I would question whether being whipped like a dog to expand removes a lot of the strategy and makes it more about doing what the game demands of you in the correct way, or you fail. What if I just want to turtle in the corner of the map and use guerrilla hit and run tactics and subterfuge to disintegrate all my enemies? The game tries to stop me. So that's the game interfering with my business right there. And even if I just took the regions with spice and stuck airports in them, well, good luck running an entire economy where you can only have 5 buildings in each village. One is an airport and the other 2 are spice buildings. That's not going to work. So basically, in its current albeit impeccable state, not really a strategy game. It's a do what you're told game that sets out this entire world of options, most of which will only work until they raise your fucking spice taxes next time around. But really, it's a rule set, which you have to follow. I am sorry to shit in this game's boots, but I think it robs the player of a degree of agency and makes it too hamster wheel-like, by relentlessly increasing your overheads and introducing more and more random attacks and pressure. Now I'm going to try and play it through on easy at some point, and maybe that will solve many of my problems, but I'm going to guess it's just going to slow those problems down a bit. But yeah, great game, has issues. There is a saying, Amazon is where extremely high performing managers go to burn out. Basically, it's a sort of company where if you get put in charge of parcel delivery and manage to double the amount of parcels your guys deliver every day, you get a big bonus, a pat on the back, and then told to double it again. Or they'll fire you and find someone who will. This game is wonderful on many levels, but the completely artificial resource pressures that keep perpetually ramping up makes it feel like your only reward for doing better is being told to do even better. Driving the player into this culvert is most likely going to reduce the longevity of the game because it channels you away from lots of potential fun, experimentation and developing weird strategies, and dictates mad-paced microing and expansion, and you just end up looking at all the potential other strategies out of the car window as you drive past, desperate to deliver your next Amazon parcel. I don't think Dune Spice Wars is a £25 game. It's fun and it's great, and if I'd paid £15 for it, I would have been happy. I'm not overly pleased that it turns out that I'm actually bankrolling 10 cents expansion, and I'm particularly aggrieved that this certainly appears to be the first instance of a AAA publisher abusing the goodwill of early access games in order to pass off a live service product. But Shiro Games did their jobs well. They had more work to do, but they acquitted themselves very well. And I don't think they've done anything blameworthy beyond cut a deal with Funcom just before Funcom got bought out by Tencent. So I will make no recommendation on this game because the developer is indeed a worthy indie studio. The game is fairly decent, but everything else about this situation is frankly looking slightly shady. I will let you be the judge. But for now, good luck and happy hunting.